Evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and good evening to you. WeatherBrains 991 for the 13th of January, 2025. Yeah, 991. Had to be sure that's right. Goodness, we're getting so close to 1,000. Hey, this is the pre-show. Magical, marvelous time where we share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and from time to time, we say some really outrageous things. So, welcome to 2025. This will be show number 2 for the year. We're getting close. Later this month, it's our 19th anniversary. 19 years of this. I'm trying to think of a good word. Potpourri of weather entertainment and information, smorgasbord. Um, but yeah, at the end of January, we turn 19, and we're about to do show 1,000. Next year, we turn 20. Who'd have thunk it? And Bill, you were on show number 1, weren't you?
I was. I would have thunk it,
Yeah,
James Spann.
we had, and again, back in the early days, it was a tightly produced 30-minute audio show, very tightly produced. We had a professional broadcaster as host, a guy named David Black, who did weather with me long ago and far away. But he would really do a great job of producing that little 30-minute show, and it was really good. Um, it's since morphed into a 2 hour
Been
loosely
downhill ever
produced.
since.
Yeah, about to say that was our peak right there. Was 19 years ago. Of course, back in those days, nobody even knew what a podcast was. I'm an early adopter. I see something and I jump on it that I like, and I needed like a creative outlet. I work pretty long hours, and everybody needs one little creative outlet where you can just be yourself and have a talk about whatever you want to talk about, have a moment of levity. And so this was the opportunity to do that. And every Monday night for 19 years, here we are. So we obviously have much to discuss this evening. Um, Coming off a little snow event down here in the deep south last Friday. And looks like we go back in the deep freeze next week. But anytime, there's no such thing as a little snow event down here. If we have 2 flakes, it is a huge socio economic situation. And no matter what you do, you will be torched. I have learned that. If you're right, you'll be torched. If you're wrong, you're torched. They are waiting. They threaten you. I had a pretty serious threat from a guy. He said he lost $10,000 last back on Friday
For
because of our
what?
forecast, and he had to shut his business down, and it cost him $10,000. And he said, "You're lucky if I live through the weekend." And he was not being funny. This was more of a serious threat. So it's just the world we live in now. Uh,
I
I
um,
like the, I
I
like the guy who sent the map last night that showed the 32 degrees below normal temperatures and said, "See, I told you this was going to be true." And I thought it was not 32 degrees below normal here yesterday.
oh my goodness. I thought we maybe should change our name to Weather Villains
yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
that one was
I was
interesting,
called
James.
a weather villain, a villain. I steal from people.
That's
How
right.
are- how are you a weather villain? I don't understand. The forecast was right.
I need a shirt that says that. I mean, we really need to.
Hmm.
We got to get some merchandise going here. You know, we had WeatherBrains merchandise for a while. In fact, that hoodie is still one of my favorites that I wear. But we need to get some merch, and I think
Yeah, just
Weather
hang on,
Villain
James.
Weather
We'll have
Villain,
some
and
merch soon.
we've got to
would
have
be a good
somebody
one.
like, twisting their mustache and, like an evil look. We're going to be screwing up your entire weekend. It's so
Yeah.
silly.
Well, which part of the forecast was wrong? I don't.
Yeah, what was
Maybe
that,
I'm.
James? Because you said good morning to everybody but this guy. That's my favorite thing
Yeah, no,
that
no,
you
no, no.
post.
He made one of my "Good Morning to Everybody" but this guy segments. Let me pull up the exact text here.
Hi, Sue.
Uh,
How are you? Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay.
I bet I have more snow than you do.
I I can guarantee it. Yep.
Hey, Sue, can you talk again for just a minute? Give us a mic
Sure,
check.
sure. What would you like me to say? Would you like to know how
It
much snow
sounds
we
like your
got here
mic
in
is
Vermont?
what have you are you using the internal mic on your computer or do you have something else?
It's on the camera.
Okay. It'll work. It just sounds a little muffled. I thought maybe you might have the wrong mic pulled up. It's fine. We roll with the flow here. Um, so here's the text. It says, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me 30 times, shame on me. Optimistic about snow. Another James Spann bust? Question mark. How is this benefiting you? Who is controlling you and why? What do you have to hide? Weather villains will always lead you astray." Um, so, so
Whoa.
that guy made the "Good morning to everybody except this guy" segment last week. I've got, oh boy. Um,
Oh.
we're getting close to the top here. Once we hit the TV side, we can get this thing started. We got the AMS going on, right? So we've got all of our AMS attendees out of pocket, I guess. I know Neil said he's probably out. And welcome to our television viewers. It is the top of the hour. We have no weather issues. It's the Monday night weather party. This is WeatherBrains. So let's roll it, and we'll see if we can get this thing going here. So
And
record track
Jen
one.
will introduce Sue
Okay.
James.
All right. Here we go. Here we go. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You're listening to WeatherBrains. They're kind of a big deal.
WeatherBrains episode number 991. Woo, we're getting so close to show 1,000. Goodness gracious. And we're also getting close to our 19th birthday, which is coming up here in a couple of weeks at the end of January. But this is for the 13th of January, 2025. We are glad you are with us this evening after some very interesting weather. James ate a lot. How much snow did you have in Tulsa town?
Officially 6.3, which is the most single storm snow we've seen since February of 2011. But parts of the metro area got 8 inches. It overperformed. We had the big picture right, but it definitely overperformed. We kept squeezing out snow, and even up to the last newscast that night, I kept looking at Michaela saying, "Gosh, can we even get 3 out of this?" It's humbling. I hate forecasting snow totals.
It's hard. I mean, I don't know of any professional meteorologist that brags on their snow forecasting ability, because the minute you do that, it will bring you to your knees. It ain't easy. So
No,
how
there's
how
some
did
that
the
have nailed,
residents?
like I was gonna say, some people have nailed at least 2 of the last 35 outrageous snow forecasts. So
How did the citizens of Tulsa handle the 6-inch snow?
it was pretty good. The roads were a lot better even the next day. The soil temps were just above freezing, so that of course helps a whole lot. Even my snowblower, janky old snowblower with a wall switch on it that I pull out for these snows just to make the neighbors jealous once a year, and it chewed through it pretty well. So
Awesome. We had about 2 or 3 inches here at the TV station. We're south of Birmingham and Hoover. And for this latitude, that's pretty big snow. We had some places north of here that had up toward 4 or 5 inches. So it was an interesting day on Friday. Bill Murray, how much snow did you have?
2.5 inches, and it was beautiful. And it stuck around all day Friday and into Saturday. And some of the shady yards yesterday still had a perfect blanket of snow. Over here, we got a nice little burst around 5:15, 5:30, I think, James. And I woke up about 5:45 and just looked at my phone, and it said, this just never happens. And it said, heavy snow. And I'm like, really? Yeah, sure. Go to the window.
Heavy
James was
snow
right.
detected near
The-
your area.
The weather villain, James Spann, was right.
Yeah, that was It was a good snow for us because the roads weren't that bad, and we had power, and the schools shut down. We had nobody trapped on roads, and it was about as good as it gets here. But Jen, let's bring in our guest because we're going to have a good show tonight.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk about snow, so that's a good thing. But if you grew up knowing that no two snowflakes are alike, it's because of the work of Wilson Bentley. He was not only the first person to photograph an individual snowflake, or more accurately, a snow crystal, but throughout 46 years of doing so, he carefully documented weather conditions and atmospheric data for every photograph. I met our guest last fall when I was in Vermont. We visited the Snowflake Bentley exhibit at the Old Red Mill in Jericho, Vermont. It is owned and operated by the Jericho Historical Society. Sue Richardson was there, and I don't think you were really supposed to be there that day, but I was very glad to see you because we got to meet you and go on a little bit of a tour. You are the great grandniece of Wilson Snowflake Bentley, and I'm excited to have you on the show tonight. Welcome to WeatherBrains, Sue.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Now, I think you're probably the big winner with how much snow you've seen. What's your total so far?
Um, right where I am, about 7 inches. You get a little closer to the mountain, which is like 10 minutes closer, and it was closer to a foot. And I think they got probably 3 feet on top of Mount Mansfield.
Okay. Yeah. So I want to find out a little bit more about you. Talk about where you grew up and your connection to Snowflake Bentley.
Okay. I grew up here in Jericho. My family's been in the town for 7 generations on both my mother and father's side. And Wilson Bentley had only one sibling, Charles, who was my great grandfather. He never married or had children, so he had 8 nieces and nephews. His favorite, Amy, was my grandmother. So I grew up on my grandparents' farm here, knowing from a very early age, as you mentioned in opening, that no two snowflakes were alike. And it was my Uncle Willie that taught that to the world. So I left for a number of years, but I've been back here in Vermont for about 14 years now. And it's home. It's in my DNA. I can't stay away forever.
It's gorgeous there. I mean, the whole state is gorgeous, but that whole area we loved being there. So let's get into Snowflake Bentley, or Uncle Willie, as you called him. When was he born? And talk a little bit about his early life.
Okay. He was born February 9th, 1865, on the family farm here in Jericho. And if you're a history buff at all, you know that that's about 2 months before the end of the Civil War. And it was during that time that photography came into widespread use. Growing up on the family farm, he was always fascinated with everything in the natural world from a very young age. His mother had been a school teacher prior to her marriage, so she taught Willie and Charlie at home, and she encouraged that interest in nature. When he was about 15 years old, she gave him an old microscope from her teaching days, and that's where the obsession, for lack of a better word, started. He looked at everything under that microscope, from a blade of grass to a flower petal. But the first time he looked at a snow crystal, he was just captivated with how beautiful it was and this intricate design in this tiny little creation. He actually spent the next 2 winters in an unheated woodshed at the back of the house with a sketch pad and his microscope on a makeshift table, catching the falling snow on a piece of dark fabric, using a broom straw as a tool to transfer it to the microscope slide, holding his breath so it wouldn't melt, and then sitting there looking through the microscope and sketching, holding his breath, turn away, catch your breath, and sketch some more. He did over 400 sketches during those 2 winters and came to realize that what he was sketching was kind of a poor representation of what he was seeing. He was a lot of things, but an artist wasn't one of them. So he had this idea. If he could combine a camera with a microscope, he could photograph them and share this beautiful discovery with the world.
So how old was he when he was sketching?
15, 16 years old.
Okay, so this was a young kid. Just that's awesome. And so this is how the idea of photographing came about. When did he acquire a camera and be able to put everything together? Because at the museum, you have all of the pieces of like his original setup and everything. So how did all this come about? And then talk a little bit too. You mentioned in his bio that he's a pioneer, and I'm going to probably butcher this word. I don't know why I'm having a hard time saying it. Photomicrography.
Yeah, you did pretty well.
Okay, I did pretty well with that. Yeah, so talk about what in the world is that, and was he the pioneer? So I'm going to let you roll on all those questions.
Okay. How he acquired the camera is an interesting story, because at the time that camera, this is about 1880, that camera cost $100. And that was a huge amount of money to a Vermont farmer in 1880. For point of reference, land was selling for about $3 an acre. So that represented 33 acres of prime farmland to his father, who was not about to spend that kind of money on something he saw as foolishness, a boyish whim. And it was actually an inheritance from his mother's parents that provided the money. And for his 17th birthday in 1882, his mother Fanny had received the inheritance and used her inheritance to buy that camera and microscope for him. That began a 3-year journey to figure out how to make it work, because this had not been done before. He had to figure out how to attach the microscope to the camera, so he built a platform to hold it. He removed the lens and put a sleeve on the front, which I'll explain in a minute. He had the microscope mounted in the front of the camera, and it's a microscope that is hinged so it could lay back at a 90-degree angle. If anybody goes on our website, jerichohistoricalsociety.org, you can see pictures of it. It's really fascinating. And he removed the eyepiece and inserted it into that sleeve he had put on the front of the camera, which is designed to be very tight so no light would get in. It had to line up perfectly to the back end of that big bellows camera so that it wouldn't cut off the pictures. He got that done. Then he had to figure out the focus process, because the camera was 3 feet long and you focus at the front and take the picture from the back. And he did this with some round wooden discs and some twine wrapped wound around the focus knob, and he figured that out so he could actually focus from the back end. And then the biggest challenge was that for the winter of 1883-84, he had this all put together, and he took a number of photographs, but they were all overexposed. He was getting too much light. So he had to come up with what today we would call a stop, small enough, and finally figured that out. And on January 15th, 1885, a month before his 20th birthday, he took the world's first photograph of a snow crystal. And the term you were struggling with there, photomicrography, is simply taking photographs through a microscope. And that was something that I believe he had read about somebody who had done that, attached a camera and a microscope somewhere, but there was no instructions, no description of how it was done. So he really was on his own with this. His father had a cousin who was a portrait photographer in Connecticut named Henry Seeley, who taught Willie the basic function of the camera and how to develop the negatives. But beyond that, Willie was on his own, this young 17, 18-year-old young man.
That's amazing. And so throughout his life, how many photographs did he take of snowflakes?
5,381.
Wow. Wow. And are they still all around, or like are they preserved? So I know they're preserved somehow in like I have one of your prints. And so those are the prints are some of his original work, right?
They're from his glass negatives, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
When he became well known, or better known, let's say, starting around late 18, very early 1900s, when he started writing articles for various scientific publications, colleges and universities from all over the world wrote to him wanting to buy copies of his negatives for teaching purposes. And he happily obliged. He charged 5 cents a piece for a duplicate negative, which is what it cost him to make one. And when he died in 1931, he was still charging 5 cents a piece. He never raised his price. He spent more money than he ever made. But it was not about the money. It was about sharing that beautiful gift with the world. So there are copies of his negatives in dusty archives all over the world. 3 years ago, I think now it would be 2 or 3 years ago, the London Natural History Museum published a collection of his photographs, about 80 of them that they had purchased from him in 1899. And they were done in a format like a notebook with his handwritten notes next to each. And they digitized it and put it online to just share it with the world, which is really what he was trying to do. He was trying to share this beautiful discovery with the world.
That's amazing. Well, in the bio, it talks about once he started taking photos, he did that quietly for 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
So he went a long period here. And you mentioned though, I mean, we know that he eventually, there were publications about him and stories, and he was able to write, he wrote a book, but during that 13 years, he just kind of just did his thing. How did he get discovered?
He part of the reason that he didn't really write about it much, or if at all, during that time was he really felt with his lack of formal education that what he was learning was probably already known to some professor at some big university. So he didn't write about it. And it was actually a professor from the University of Vermont named George Perkins who heard about his work and wrote to him and asked him to come and bring his research, which he did. And Professor Perkins helped him and co-authored the first article in 1898. And after that, he did write quite prolifically for the next decade for mostly scientific publications. And that's why more and more of the colleges that found out about his work and started using his material for teaching. But he was virtually ignored by the scientific community for a decade. And I think part of the reason for that, there was probably some level of arrogance there. What does some Vermont farmer know that we don't already know? But also, Willie, I describe him as having the mind of a scientist and the soul of a poet. And if you read any of his writings, he was very eloquent in his style of writing, very poetic, which of course is a no-no in the scientific community. It's supposed to be very objective and just factual. And he simply could not help himself. He was so enamored and with the beauty in these snow crystals that even in the scientific articles, he tended to wax poetic. So we think that had a lot to do with him being ignored by the scientific community. They ignored him until they couldn't. But during that time, he was becoming more and more widely known, not only in the scientific community, or in the world of academia, if you will. But he also, after that, wrote articles for other magazines, more mainstream, Harper's, National Geographic, and newspapers were interviewing him, and people were learning about him, and he was becoming more widely known to the population at large, if you will. Even Tiffany's jeweler bought a set of his photographs for jewelry design, which was quite extraordinary.
Hey, Sue, thanks for joining us. James Adelot down in Tulsa. When did he realize he was onto something with various shapes and sizes of dendrites? I imagine before photography, people kind of noticed things were different, but when did he notice every one of these stinking things is different?
Well, it was a ongoing process. That first dozen years or so, when he wasn't writing anything, he was studying them. He created what today we would call a spreadsheet. And every photograph he took, he had documented the temperature, the humidity, what part of the storm it came from, the east or west side, the leading edge, the middle, the back end. And he studied this data over and with the photographs, the corresponding photographs over a long period of time. And he developed these theories on how they formed and what type of crystals formed at different temperatures and what part of the storm the best crystals came from. And he started writing about that, as I said, in 1898 was the first article. So by then, I think he had a pretty good idea that what the differences were and what was causing those differences in the crystals.
So, Sue, it's a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you.
And what fascinating work. Jen, you know who he reminds me of?
Yes, Thomas Grisoulis.
That's one, but somebody
Oh,
else, another famous scientist, James A. Who does this remind you of? This extensive record keeping and notes and
Fujita?
Fujita, James
Vegeta.
Spann. That's
Yeah.
exactly
I was going
who.
to say Galileo.
Yeah, well, that's in the same
Yeah, him
world.
too. Yeah.
That's what it really strikes me as. These are real geniuses at work. And I imagine he was relatively unappreciated by the local uh, farmers who probably didn't see much practicality in what he was doing. Sue, was that the case? I mean, they wanted to grow more
Absolutely.
crops, and this probably didn't grow any more crops.
Right. And it didn't make the cows give more milk. People around town thought he was a little cracked. Even his own family, most of them thought he was a little nuts, messing with snow because, as you said, it doesn't contribute anything. It's a pain in the neck for the farmers to deal with in the winter. So yeah, he was very much unappreciated for a very long time here in the community, and as I said, even by his own family. Only his mother was the one. She was the one that truly supported him in what he did. And when she died in 1906, he was just devastated. I mean, it was a tremendous loss to him. But he soldiered on, if you will, and continued his work.
That's amazing. That's what those moms are for. I tell you
Yep.
what, they're great at keeping you on focus, and it's great when they support you like that. But uh, did he ever experience hurt feelings over the lack of recognition in the meteorological community?
Yeah, well, in the meteorological community, yes. But I think more so with the lack of recognition, the lack of acceptance in his local community. At one time, I don't remember the year, he thought about it and he thought that maybe if they could see these snow crystals as he does, maybe people would come to understand and appreciate what he was what he was doing. So he arranged to give a talk. By that time, he had purchased a slide projector and had slides made from his negatives because he was lecturing in different places. So he made arrangements to give a talk here in Jericho. He put up flyers, announcement at the store and the local places, and it was a beautiful summer evening. It was free, and only 6 people showed up. He was heartbroken. They just didn't care.
That
In,
is just insane.
yeah, in later years, they did come to have a better understanding once he became more widely known. But still, people just these are practical, stoic old Vermont farmers who, if it's not helping them make more money on the farm or making their work easier, they didn't care about it.
Wow. Did he ever get recognized very, very much in the weather community? And if he did, who was responsible for it?
He did. Through the articles that he wrote, but in about 1929, a fellow named William Humphreys, who was a scientist and high up with the National Weather Bureau, was a longtime supporter of Willie and his work. And he felt very strongly that this work needed to be preserved. So he raised money to publish a book, a collection of Willie's photographs. And they spent 2 years going through the 5,381 photographs and narrowing it down to about the best 2,400. And it was Humphreys wrote the introduction, and then it was submitted to the publisher in the spring of 1931. And the day after Thanksgiving, Willie received his copy of the book. It's called Snow Crystals. I think I got that upside down, yeah. And it's a beautiful book. It's a large format, about 9.5 by 12, and it contains about 2,400 of his best work. And his dream from that very first photograph had been to share this with the world, and that dream came true. And he held it in his hands. And when you think about it, how many people get to do that? Truly, that to live long enough to see their life's work come to fruition. He did. And a month later, he was gone. But he lived long enough to see his dream come true. And that is quite extraordinary. And this is his copy of the book.
Oh my goodness, what a treasure that
Mhm.
is. I
Yes,
don't imagine. I don't imagine if I beat a door to eBay, I'm going to find that ammo anywhere.
it's in print still in a smaller edition, soft cover edition, but Dover still publishes it.
Oh
Troy
my
Kimmel can
goodness!
dig up the PDF from somewhere.
Yeah, he's probably got that book stuck in that monstrosity he calls a house over there, James A.
You know, didn't not a lot of people know, but they filmed that last scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark, that endless warehouse. That's actually Troy's library. But yeah, I did. How many cool people does Vermont outperform the rest of the country in per capita number of people that have done really awesome weather things? Greg Carbon, Tom Grzoulis, Snowflake, Bentley. This is really cool.
Yeah, well, we get some really interesting weather up here.
Yeah, Jen, I was going to ask you how far away is Jericho from where Greg has settled?
where are you? Where is Jericho? Where's the nearest point?
12 miles east of Burlington.
Okay. So it's north of him and west of Grzoulis. So, I mean, we were tootling around and made our way to Jericho and on our travels around that area. So it's I'm not quite sure how far. I can't remember where Carbon lives, but you can get pretty much in anywhere in Vermont fairly quickly.
Yeah,
You know,
let's
depending
don't
on
Vermont's
the
not
let's
a
time.
very
don't
big
dox him
state.
here.
Yeah.
So Jen, when you went, were you going to look up some tornadoes at the Historical Society in Jericho?
No, we were going to Snowflake Bentley's exhibit. That's exactly why we decided to go. We wanted to. Uh, John Gordon is very good at looking up, just different things where you can just go do different things. So I let him be in charge of that, of getting us to different places. And so he's like, "We're going to go see the Snowflake Bentley exhibit." I'm like, "Sounds good to me." And so we walked
Now
in
wait a
and
minute. John Gordon went on that trip with you
hmm yeah,
to see Grzoulis?
to see Grzoulis.
Oh my
Yeah, were you not here the
goodness.
night that
I
John was on?
was. I must have been asleep or something.
Yeah.
How did
Oh
I miss
yeah.
that fact?
Yeah, he was because he'd been wanting to meet Grzoulis as well, and because he'd been working with him for decades on different tornado of events. The tornado down in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, that lost F5 or the forgotten F5, and all that. So he was like a kid in the candy store meeting him as well. And so it was he and I, and then a friend of his who all went up there. And the first day we hung out with Grzoulis, and then the second day I went with them, just me, and we were riding around. They took me all across Vermont, and it was like riding with my grandparents. We were playing games in the car. It was awesome. I loved it. Just talking and visiting. They became our family, so it
Oh,
was
you should
great.
have videoed all that, Jen. It would have been
It would have been a hoot.
would have been a great documentary. So,
That's
Sue,
right.
I read that he kept detailed weather records. What happened to them? Were they donated to a society somewhere? Is it in the Historical
The
Society at Jericho, or what happened to them?
Buffalo Museum of Science has most of them.
The which one? The which museum?
Buffalo, Buffalo, New York. Um, when when he was alive, those later years after he became more well known, as I mentioned earlier, he was invited to lecture. He lectured at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia, the Buffalo Museum of Science, McGill University, and a number of different places. So he had a long established relationship with Buffalo. So when he passed away in 1931, they actually purchased a lot of his negatives, and the family also gave them his weather journals and his photographic journals. I have I have a transcribed copy of them at the mill of a lot of them, but they were quite fascinating because he developed a series of symbols that looked like little hieroglyphics. And he'd do weather readings 3 times a day with temperature and humidity and all these different things. And he taught a couple of his nephews how to do them as well. So if he was away, they could do the weather readings for him. So he had 2 different journals, one his photographic and the other his weather.
So did he go to college
Oh
or
gosh, no. He went to school for 3 months when he was 14. That was the extent of his formal education.
did he have any dream? I
Wow.
mean, this man could have probably gone to any major university and made great contributions. Did he ever regret having not done that?
I think so, in truth, because he was content on the farm. He really truly was. After his parents died, he and his brother Charlie owned the farm together. That's how he supported himself. I think maybe when he was first starting with this and feeling like that lack of formal education might be hindering him, perhaps he would have liked to have gone to college. But I think in later years, I don't think he ever regretted not having that formal education because he contributed so much. He read everything he could get his hands on. I remember a quote from an interview that was done with him one time, and he talking about his mother and the fact that he learned about the finer things in life from her. She had books, and he read them all, including a set of encyclopedia. So he was a lifelong learner. He just did it on his own.
So I guess farming took place in the spring and the summer when the snow season was winding down. So was that his outlet? Was his farm work?
Well, that was his vocation. That's how he supported himself. And it's fortunate that his passion project, if you will, took place in the winter when there's not nearly as much to do on the farm. All you got to do is feed the cows, clean out the barn, and milk them twice a day, and you're good for the most part. Gather the eggs from the chickens.
Wow, this is just a really cool story. Don't you wish, Jen, there more you could go back and meet him?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love this history, and I just think he would have been neat to sit and talk to and just observe him working. And I just it reminds me of Thomas Gruzulis
It
just because
does.
just because he's a very eccentric person, and he is, he has his way of doing things, and he's got his organization. And like I was reading part in the bio how, he had his own quarters, not Grizzoulis, but Snowflake Bentley, but he had his own, quarters. He never got married. He had his own way of organizing himself. He knew where everything was, even though it may have looked like a big fat mess to everybody else. He knew where everything was in his space. And that's how it is with Tom. He's got his basement, he's got everything laid out and all of his materials for tornado history and what have you. And he knows where everything is, even though Doris is like, I can't find anything in here. It's an eccentric, and you're when you're a scientist like that and you're diving into research and studying and all that, you're very creative. And so I think it's neat too to see, as I was reading, that Bentley was also a musician. So he was very scientific, but he was very artistic, and you can see that in the fact that he was connecting with jewelers and all that. But talk a little bit about the fact that he was a musician. He played piano and all kinds of different instruments.
Yeah, he played four different instruments. He played piano, violin, clarinet, and cornet. And piano was his favorite. But he really truly was one of those unique right brain, left brain. As I mentioned earlier, that scientific mind with that poetic side to him. Um, just I wish I had I wish I had had an opportunity to meet him, but I came to know him through my grandmother's stories and my mother's stories. He had this great sense of humor. He was kind of in some ways almost like the absent-minded professor, but yet his mind was sharp as could be. I remember one story. They had gone to what they call a kitchen tunk, which was like a dance at someone's home, and he had this carriage where he used a horse and buggy, and this buggy, the wheels on the front were smaller than the ones on the back. That's how it was designed. So a bunch of the local boys decided to play a prank on Mr. Bentley. They went out and switched the wheels, put the big ones on the front and the little ones on the back. He drove it for a week like that before he changed it back. And nobody ever knew if he was truly that absent-minded and didn't pay attention to it, or if he just decided to prank them back.
That's
So
awesome.
he was quite a funny character by all accounts. There's a movie of him. It's not very long, obviously. It was done in 1917. This film crew came up from New York to film him doing his work. And it was in the wintertime, of course. And the room that he worked in was an unheated woodshed at the back of the house because it had to be as cold where he was working as it was outside in order for the snow crystals to not melt right away or evaporate. So it wasn't a very big space. So they moved all of his stuff outside, his camera, his his microscope, his observation microscope, all of the stuff. They wanted him dressed up in his Sunday go-to meeting, his one suit that he owned, which he would never have been wearing when he was normally working. And he used at one time, originally, a broom straw as a tool to move the snow crystals to the microscope slide. By that point, he had created a stylus from wood that was a sharp point and a little bit larger on the end because he wore the big heavy mittens, so there'd be no heat transference from his hands to anything. So anyway, that wouldn't have shown up in the movie film that they were filming. And the snow crystals are tiny, so they wouldn't have showed up. So they cut out big paper snowflakes and this big stick that they got him working with, which is way out of proportion, to try to show what he was doing. And it wasn't snowing that day. So they scooped up snow into a basket and sent one of the nephews upstairs to drop it down on him. Well, it didn't come down in flakes. It came down in big old clumps and landed on his hat and on his shoulders and everything. It was quite comical, but that movie can still be found out there at the UVM Special Collections. I think has it on there. It's on various websites, but it's hilarious. And he just got such a kick out of that because it was just to him kind of foolishness, but it's out there. And it wasn't just snow that intrigued him. When scientists and meteorologists, scientists were starting to study rainfall, annual rainfall totals, he was intrigued by that. And he read about it with great interest. And he thought about it, and he came to this conclusion that in order to understand rain, it's kind of like, just like it was with understanding snow, you have to go to the source, which is the clouds and the individual raindrops. So he had this idea on how to measure the size of a raindrop. And there's a journal entry it's November 9th, 1898, when he made this discovery. His idea, he took a pan from his mother's kitchen and put about an inch of flour in it. Went out in the rainstorm, let the raindrops hit it, brought it in and let it sit. And his initial idea was to measure the diameter of the hole that was left in the flour by the raindrops. Well, we know that when you mix flour and water, you get dough. So what he discovered was that in the bottom of each of these depressions, there was a dough pellet. And you could measure that, and he believed get the size of the raindrops. So he experimented with known measured quantities, size drops, and tested his theory and came to the conclusion that this was a valid way of measuring the size of raindrops. Fast forward 100 years, a meteorologist named Duncan Blanchard, who wrote a biography on Snowflake Bentley, the official one. Duncan told me a great story about 25 years ago, how he tasked his students, because he taught at SUNY Albany after he retired from NOAA. He tasked his students with coming up with ways to measure the size of raindrops. And as you can imagine, these brilliant young minds came up with all kinds of wild ideas. One day the student comes in all excited. Professor Blanchard, I had this great idea. I took a pan of flour and I went out in the rainstorm. And of course, Duncan had to commend him for thinking outside the box, and then completely burst his bubble by telling him that that's a very good method that was invented by a Vermont farmer about 100 years prior. And that method is still used today.
Yeah.
But he really was creative in his thought process. He had a very serious side, but he just was so ingenious and so creative. Just an extraordinary man. The Smithsonian has a nice collection of his negatives too, about 500 of them that he personally gave to them in 1904. So there's copies of his work are just out there all over the world. And I love that 93 years after his death, people are still interested in his work. There's a children's book that was written about 27 years ago, that won the Caldecott Award. It's in pretty much every elementary and middle school library in the country. And we get teachers literally from all across the country and beyond that come to the museum. It's like a pilgrimage because they've been reading this book to their students for 25 years, and to come and actually see the camera and see the equipment he worked with and drive by the house, it's almost like a pilgrimage for them. It's incredible that he has that kind of a legacy. And one thing we didn't mention was after he received his copy of the book, he was gone he died a month later. And it was snow that led to his death, ultimately, because that winter was much warmer than normal starting out. And by the 7th of December, there had not been a snowstorm here in Vermont, or at least here in Jericho. So he did something he did often. He walked from his home over the mountain to the next town of Richmond and took the train to Burlington. Coming back that afternoon, it had started snowing. And by the time he got to Richmond, it was snowing hard. And I remember my grandmother telling me this story, that there was a friend of his at the depot who tried to convince him to stay the night with his family because the snowstorm was so bad. Willie was having none of it. He was going to get home and photograph whatever that storm had to offer, even though he was not dressed for it. He had on just regular shoes, a top coat and a hat, no mittens, no scarf, no boots. He walked 7 miles in a blizzard over the mountain to get home. And of course, by the time he got there, he was soaked to the hide. He was bone chilled. He took sick and it turned into pneumonia. And he died on the 23rd of December. And I could be very, very sad by that because he was only 66 years old. But the fact that he lived long enough to see his dream come true and his life's work come to fruition is just such an extraordinary gift that so few people get to experience. So as Paul Harvey would say, and that is the rest of the story.
Wow.
That you were talking about the kids' book. So what is the response of the kids? What do the teachers tell you that the kids' reaction is to the story?
Love it. I do Zoom programs with schools all over the country now, where they read the story to the kids, and then the kids are tasked with coming up with questions to ask me. So we'll do a Zoom program, and they'll one at a time will come up and ask their question. And these kids have some really well thought out questions. They're 7, 8, 9 years old, maybe a little older. But the kids love it because who doesn't love snowflakes? Even in the warm climates where they've never seen a snowflake, they're still intrigued by this story.
Yeah, I bet James Van could predict what some of his third graders would ask Sue. James, what do you think is the funniest question that one of them might ask?
Oh, those knuckleheads! This is you just be ready for anything. That's all I can say. Be ready for anything.
Yeah, I was remembered reading, and it's that really wonderful biography from 1970 from Duncan Blanchard that's on the website. I may actually make that my pick of the week so folks can go read this, but it's very detailed about Snowflake Bentley's life. But his last entry in his, I guess it would be like a weather blog today, but his weather journal was on December 7th, 1931. He finished his entry saying cold north wind afternoon, snow flying. That was his last entry.
He wrote that entry when he got back home after walking from the train station.
Okay, so right after he got back. Wow.
Yeah.
And so then he was sick then, and he died on the 23rd. So he pretty much went downhill after that with just being so sick. Okay. Wow. In that article as well, I was really struck by some things that were pointed out. Again, this was the Bio and Weatherwise magazine from 1970, but Bentley wrote some stuff for the Monthly Weather Review, and it was some really interesting points. This was in a 1902 paper with some of the details. And, since we are weather brains and a bunch of geeks, I thought these were some really great points from a meteorological perspective on his analysis of some of the data, that different segments of a storm, east, north, etc., produce their own predominant type of ice crystal, that the form of the crystal, stellar, hexagonal, plates, etc., was a function of the air temperature, that the circulation within the storm could be deduced from the crystal structure, and that the change in form often noted in a single crystal reflected the changes in the temperature of the air through which the crystal fell on its journey to the ground. So those are some neat, perspectives of just from his intense work. It's really cool. And then I noted as well that in 1924 he received the first research grant ever from the AMS.
Yep. It was $25.
$25. Yeah, that's amazing. So I'm glad to see he was, even though it was kind of slow to go, he was at least recognized, to receive that grant. I know it wasn't a whole lot of money, but back then it was probably a lot. And,
Yeah,
for 40 years of extremely patient work,
yeah.
yeah, you got that
He
right.
was so pleased with that because I think, one of you folks asked me a question earlier about his, about not receiving recognition from the scientific community. And I think when he received that grant, it just pleased him so much because it was validation that what he was doing was important, and to get that validation from the scientific community finally, I think was meant a great deal to him.
So can you talk a little bit about the historical society and the exhibit, and like if someone visits, what will they see there, and what is their experience like?
Well, it's quite a unique place to visit because the Old Red Mill is a National Historic Site in itself. It's an old grist mill dating back to the 1800s, that's got quite a storied history, and a lot of the old milling equipment is still there. So this was actually became it was privately owned until 1972 and used for a variety of purposes after it stopped being a mill. Um, it's on the town seal. It's such a landmark that the folks in town were really concerned what was going to happen to it. So the town purchased the mill from the last private owner, and the Historical Society formed with the purpose of preserving this beautiful historic structure. It's one of the most photographed landmarks in New England. And during that preservation, they proved that they could do it. So the town signed it over to the Historical Society. And the founder of the society, Blair Williams, was a good friend of my grandmother's. So at some point, she came to my grandmother and asked to borrow Uncle Willie's camera for display because she thought it would be a neat idea. It's certainly part of the town of Jericho's history. And she thought that would bring people in. And she borrowed some of the glass negatives to make some limited edition prints to sell to raise money for the preservation of the mill. So today, the entire exhibit's been added to over the years by family. It's on loan. It's on long-term loan. Graham had the cameras. Some of it passed to me. Some of the things passed to my brother. So we have a beautiful collection. We have the camera that he took the photographs with, just like it was the last time he used it, with the microscope on the front, his observation microscope. There's a smaller camera that he used to take family portraits, photographs that you'll see in the back of his book of frost on window panes, dew on plants, and the ever popular, my very favorite, the dew on a grasshopper that he captured. It's right there in the center. He caught this grasshopper, used sewing thread to loosely tie it to the flower so he wouldn't hurt it, let the dew fall on it, photographed it, and let it loose. So there's some really, really fun stuff. But that camera is there, his projector and slides and some of his negatives, a whole series of his original photographs that are not reprints or anything. They're photos that he actually took. And they're arranged specifically to show the different types of crystals that form into different temperature ranges. So it's a really neat exhibit. It's not a big exhibit. It's 2 rooms, but it's a self-guided tour unless you happen to catch me when I'm there, which is actually most of the time. And I'm happy to do tours. But it's such a neat collection. The fact that this is all still together, that has been preserved, that my grandmother had the foresight to keep these items and preserve them and keep them together and stress the importance to the family. I think that was pretty special. And then, of course, we also have a shop where, what we call the craft shop, where we feature the Snowflake Bentley prints and ornaments, and along with that, the work of about 95 Vermont artists and crafters as well. So it's quite a fun place to visit.
Sue, in his travels, which seem to be kind of concentrated in the Northeast and that region. Um, did he ever talk about like regional differences in snowflakes? I know that sounds like the craziest question ever, but you know how people will say, "Well, we don't get that kind of storm here."
Right.
But did he ever talk with other people that had tried snow photography in say Kansas or something
I don't
and
think there
discuss
was
it?
anybody that had tried snow photography but when he was still alive. Um, but I do know that at one time, one of his trips he went to Montreal to lecture at McGill, and it was in the wintertime. He always traveled by train, and he took his camera with him, and he did take some photographs, some snow crystal photographs there in Canada, but he said they weren't nearly as pretty as the ones in Vermont. Now, maybe that was a little prejudice, but again, there's so many there's factors that affect how they form, and it's temperature and humidity and the wind and the clouds and all that. And where he lived was probably the perfect place on earth for him to be born, because they were in a wide valley between Mount Mansfield and Bolton Mountain, and that valley has pretty much their own little weather system going on. It gets trapped between the mountains and just sits there and dumps. And as the crow flies, it's like 4 miles from where the museum is to where the house is. And we might get 3 inches of snow, and they'll get 7 or 8 over there. So it's really just, it was meant to be. He was born in the right place with the right technology, because that camera he utilized the dry plate method, which was developed in, I'm trying to remember, I think it was 1871, I think, was when that was developed. That method was developed, and he was given the camera in 1882. And the prior technology he would not have been able to do this with the old wet plate method. But that dry plate method, the right technology was available at the right time in the right place for him to be able to do it. So I have to believe it was just meant to be.
So, Sue, you mention that he was an introvert? Was that something you said or not? Did I make that up?
No, he was a quiet man, a humble man. But my understanding is that when you got talking about snowflakes, he became very animated. But he was a very humble man. He wasn't pushy at all. He wasn't loud or anything. He just became very animated when you talked on a subject that he was so passionate about.
Well, I read in his extended bio that he not only collected snowflakes, he collected smiles.
Mhm.
And so talk about that for a minute because he obviously was interested in people
Yeah.
and he found that fascinating. So talk about that
Yeah,
for a minute.
with the smaller camera that he acquired, he never married, but he had a lot of lady friends. And he used to host Fresh Air Fund children from New York, and he loved people. He loved children, his nieces and nephews. He was very fond of all of them. But there was something about a pretty girl's smile that just captivated him, and he would photograph them. It was just, I don't know, much beyond that. There was just something about it. I don't know what it was about a pretty girl smiling, or any girl smiling at him, because it was the girls that he photographed. I don't think he cared so much about the men's smiles.
They're they're ugly anyway, so you can't blame him. But yeah, I thought that was
Yeah,
a neat part of his personality. That spoke a lot to what he was about. I can't find the Blanchard biography anywhere, so
it's out
I'm
of print.
I'm gonna be on a new lifelong search since I've completed my Weatherwise collection. I'm gonna have to see if I can find this Blanchard book on Snowflake Bentley, Jen Naremore.
Yeah, it's out of print. This is the book, The Snowflake Man.
Hmm.
I did see
But
that.
Duncan passed away in 2016, and it was being published out of a small publishing house in Ohio. And the owner of that publishing house passed away a year last September. And I have tried to get in touch with anybody, the person that was settling the estate. Nobody would call me back. I think they just kind of closed it down and sold off the building and the equipment, and kind of let the rest of it go. So it's been out of print for about a year and a half now. But I think you might find a copy on Amazon, a used copy, but that's about the
And
I will
he's
be
looking.
searching for it.
Yeah, I can see you searching. I wanted to show this. I showed this before, but I want to show it again. I love this. So when you go to the museum or yeah, in the shop, you can see these different prints. And I just fell in love with this print. So I have a frame for it. I have to stick it in there and hang it up here in my office and just be surrounded by history and I love it. I love learning about this. And speaking of history, Sue, I want to talk to you a little bit about the fact, listening to your grandma and getting all these stories and how that sparked your interest in genealogy. And first of all, what are some of the tricks of the trade that you've learned on if you want to do genealogy or history research? What are some tricks of the trade that you can pass off to our audience? Because we do have historians out there too. Bill and I are two of the biggest ones on this show. We love weather history. So, what are some tricks that you would throw out to folks?
First of all, start with what you know and work backwards from there and verify everything. Because there is so much incorrect information out there, and in genealogy in particular. People have developed an interest in it in the last 15 years or so, and they start going online and researching with the genealogy sites, and they're building their family tree online, and they've got the parents born after the children, and because they're just kind of throwing stuff out there, and you have to verify, prove it, see the documentation, make a copy of the documentation. And there's a lot of a lot of information is available online, but in a lot of states there is not. So it depends on where your search takes you. You spend a lot of times in town clerk's offices and town halls and dusty archives and searching. But I've been doing it for, oh gosh, about 25 years now. And I've traced I have over 20,000 people in my family tree. I've traced it back many, many, many generations, and some are easier to trace than others.
That's
But it's
amazing.
fascinating. You get to play
Yeah.
detective. And when you make a discovery, it's like,
Yes.
oh my gosh, I've been searching for this for 10 years now, and I found it.
Yeah. See, Sue, you and I are like two peas in a pod. I'm more at home in a dusty archive than I am in my own house. I
Yeah.
would rather be in a library or a history center. I love hitting the road. I've been able to do that a lot more to do tornado history, and it has just been. There's so many neat people out there, and
Yeah.
you can find so much more when you actually go into the library and you're looking at the local newspapers because there's so much more that's not digitized yet, and it's been amazing, and people will pull out photos that they've got hidden in a drawer somewhere,
Yeah.
and it's like amazing stuff. Do you think, and with your experience, you talk to kids, and do you think that there are younger generations that are interested in their family lineage and history as a whole?
Well, it seems, I don't know with the young kids so much because I'm talking about Snowflake Bentley and about Snowflakes and his work. But they do ask questions about him and about the family. I know that the generation when I was growing up as a kid, I was fascinated with Graham's stories, but not my brother, who was a year older than I am, couldn't have cared less about it, And so it's not just the generation now, but I think every generation is like, I don't want to listen to my grandparents' old stories. And then when they become adults and start having their own families, that's when they start to think about it more. So the kids, there's a few of them out there that care, but I've got nieces and nephews and grandniece and nephews that couldn't care less
Hmm.
about the
Yeah.
family history. I
Yeah.
think for me, it was because my grandmother was such a believer in and so proud of the heritage, that she instilled that in me. And I think that's what happens a lot of times is that there's somebody in your life, an older person, that just instills that, inspires you to want to learn that history, to learn more about it. That it was certainly my grandmother in my case.
Yeah, it was my dad for me because he did the genealogy for our family, and he was in there just hours upon hours digging and getting, and then he would, talk to family members and get stories, and then if he was traveling, he would find his way to a cemetery and all that kind of. So I get it natural for sure, and but I really didn't have the bigger respect for it until I got a little bit older, and I just think it's wonderful what you all have set up at the Historical Society and the museum. I highly recommend if you're in that area to visit. And I'm going to toss it over to James, who may have some final questions for you. But Sue, stick around if you like to. We do a few different segments, and then I didn't tell you about picks of the week, but what we'll do is we'll have you do what you just pick something that you want people to learn about. It could be a website or a book or whatever. You've already tossed some stuff out, but you're more than welcome to stick around with us. But I'm going to toss it over to James Spann.
Yeah, Sue, real quick, one for those that are just joining us live, kind of plug whatever you need to plug about what we've talked about tonight, books or museums, anything. Just get kind of a summary of what people can do to see more about what we talked about tonight with Snowflake Bentley.
Okay, the Jericho Historical Society Museum in Jericho, Vermont, houses the Snowflake Bentley collection, which is his cameras, microscopes, all of the equipment that he worked with. It's a fascinating exhibit. So if you're in that part of the country, certainly come by and see us. The website, jerichohistoricalsociety.org, also has a lot of great information and links. His articles are available out there online. And again, the Smithsonian has a beautiful collection of his work. The Buffalo Museum of Science has a beautiful collection of his work, with over 5,000 individual snow crystals that he photographed. They're just extraordinary. And if you go online anywhere and Google or search Snowflake Bentley, you'll come up with all kinds of photos and articles, and the book that was published just before he died, Snow Crystals, is still in print as well. And it's an extraordinary collection of about 2,400 beautiful photographs of his work.
And he died in 1931?
Correct.
So he did not have to go through the Great Depression, I guess.
No, he died right at the beginning of it.
Wow. Well, life well lived, it sounds like. It sounds like a marvelous person and interesting personality as well. So, Sue, you're welcome to stay with us. We're going to do a couple of recorded segments. We're going to have Tony Rice and his astronomy report. We have Jen in This Week in Tornado History. We got to come back and talk about the Los Angeles fires, what happened, the forecast, the communication process. We're going to talk about the AMS. Well, a lot of our folks were at AMS this week in New Orleans here. Wait, is that a cat I see?
Yes.
And then again, for those that are listening, I see a cat here. What's that cat's
the
name?
kitty's? Yeah, exactly.
Her name is
Snowflake?
It should have been Snowflake or Snowball because she's pure white. But
So
when I adopted her, rescued her from the Humane Society, she was 5 years old and she already had a name, so I didn't that she knew and responded to, so I didn't change it. So her name is Lulu.
Oh, she's cute.
Lulu looks very content. Very content.
Yeah, she's
well fed, happy, and
yeah.
All right, so let's take a break. Let's hear from Tony, and from Jen. We'll be right back with much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
On Monday night, January 13th, the full wolf moon will pass in front of Mars, hiding it for a little more than an hour. This is an occultation, and it's like a solar eclipse in a couple of ways. Like eclipses, lunar occultations like this one aren't really that rare on a global scale. There's one visible from Earth about 4 to 6 times each year. But on a local scale, they are far more rare. The southern tip of Florida saw an occultation of Saturn back in November. In the western U.S., they saw Saturn covered up by the moon back in September. But the southern and eastern U.S., they haven't seen a good one for over 20 years, when Jupiter hid behind the moon back in December of 2007. There's been some since then, but they've all been during daylight hours. To see this occultation, look for the orangey point of light near the moon's southern limb. That's Mars. Particularly bright right now because it reaches opposition this week, the point in its orbit where it's opposite the sun in the sky. Therefore the closest and therefore the brightest. The show starts shortly after 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central, and so on, and by about 15 minutes later, the red planet will disappear behind the moon. Mars will reemerge on the other side a little more than an hour later. Interestingly, where Mars appears along the moon's edge, or limb, depends on where you are. In the southern U.S., it will appear along this southern limb, around the 6 o'clock position. Further north you go, the more westernly it appears, at about the 8 o'clock position as you get into Canada. That's a demonstration of how close the moon is, about 400,000 kilometers, relative to where Mars is, about 243 million kilometers. Also this week, there's a new comet in the sky that's worth looking for. Comet C 2024 G3 Atlas was discovered just last year. That's where the 2024 part comes from. Now, it passed perihelion, or the closest point in its orbit to the Sun, shortly after 1 a.m. Eastern this morning. You may have heard this described as being as bright as Venus. And yeah, it was observed at pretty close to that brightness early this morning. But this isn't a comet that is so bright that you're going to see it in daylight, because it's too close to the Sun. The comet and the Sun are separated by about 5 degrees in the sky right now. That's the challenge with comets. They're easiest to see when they're brightest, and they're brightest when they're closest to the Sun. While it might not be as brilliant as some news sources are suggesting, the comet can still be seen from the right location. Look to the western horizon beginning this evening once the Sun has fully set, 4 degrees above the horizon, a little less than the width of 3 fingers on your outstretched hand. That gives you about 20 minutes before it sets. Tonight it's going to be at its brightest. Tomorrow night could be better though, as the gap between the comet and the Sun widens a bit, making it appear a few degrees higher at sunset and give you another 20 minutes or so above the horizon. But the distance between it and Earth is widening, causing the brightness to cut in half. To maximize your chances of seeing the comet, try to find a spot with the clearest western horizon. I like to be on the east side of a lake or a big field. Those sites also tend to have the least light pollution, which really helps. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, January 13th, 2006, 15 tornadoes occurred on this day. All were rated F0 or F1. There was an F1 in Belleville, Alabama, causing tremendous damage to several homes and the local fire department. Betty Williams, age 58, had just returned home from the store. Tragically, she was killed by a falling chimney when she went to her car to unload it. January 14th, 1932, Trenton, Tennessee. A devastating F4 tornado swept away 9 substantial homes. In one farmhouse, 10 of 13 members of the Rice family were killed. 6 were children, ages 10 and under. January 15th, 2017, an EF2 tornado tracked for 12 miles from northeast of Gatesville to west of Valley Mills, Texas. 2 homes were unroofed and some barns and farm equipment were destroyed. January 16th, 1926, Thomas Grzoulis documents an F2 tornado that moved near Taylor, Texas. Several barns were destroyed and livestock were killed. 22 tornadoes were confirmed on January 17th, 1999. They encompass the states of Arkansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee. The strongest were in Tennessee, with 2 F3s reported, and the strongest and deadliest, an F4, that moved through parts of Madison County and the town of Jackson. The Hollywood Shopping Center had severe damage, and a funeral home near it was demolished except for interior rooms. Over 200 homes were destroyed, and 300 more had lesser damage. There were a total of 6 fatalities, and over 100 people were injured. Explore more tornado history at tornadotalk.com.
Hey. We might have some email to read this week. I have a funny feeling we do.
We do. We have several emails. I'm not going to get to all of them. I'm going to hold on to a few because I'm still hoping that maybe as things kind of calm down, Bill, that we'll be able to get someone to talk about the wildfires and be able to answer some of the questions. We've had some great emails that have come through. Jim Lewis has got some questions here about modeling fires and, planning for fires. And so even Neil, if he can get on here at some point soon, that we can get him on here. We actually have other folks who've been writing about modeling. So it may be time to get the model czar back on just to have a show of his own again and focus in on some of these model questions. There's a lot of interest on models and, documenting the performance of them and what have you. So we have a few questions I'm going to hold on to. We have a question that came in from Tom Webb. We had on the books, Bill, at one point Walt Maddox from the mayor of Tuscaloosa, and he was asking about that. I don't think we had him on. I don't know if I think there's still some interest.
It's James's fault. So
Okay.
James is supposed to ask him. So
I actually saw Mayor Maddox at a UAB basketball game.
that seems
This
like
was
anathema.
yeah, this was Saturday a week ago, and we got talking about stuff, and I should have nailed him at that particular moment. It was a golden moment to get him to commit, but I'll make that happen. I'll get him on the show. He's a great guy, good friend.
He really is.
That would be great. Brian Fowler wrote and sent in a pick of the week for someone of the fire tornado that flared for the Palisades fire. I actually used that in the Tornado Talk newsletter today. So thank you for that, Brian. And I also wanted to comment here on your other thing here. I'm a Wisconsin Badgers fan, so Notre Dame versus Ohio State can both lose. Yes, I am all about that since Penn State did lose, and I'm not going to watch the final game now. So I will be here next week on WeatherBrains because I'm not.
I guess we can stay on Monday night next week, James.
I'm not interested in that. But anyway, we also had someone who is really interested. Bill, going to put you on the spot on show 1000, and had some suggestions for what we could possibly be doing for that. And I think inquiring minds want to know. How are things looking for show 1000, which will be St. Patty's Day?
It's 10 shows away. That's all I know.
Yeah. No, we are putting stuff together. We just want to build that excitement and that anticipation. But we do have some things that we're brewing.
Makes my palms sweat.
No, it's going to be great.
Well, I'll just leak one of them. We have some semi-nude TikTok dancers that are going to be doing 384-hour GFS maps on site. So that's part of it. Yeah.
Not one of us,
Sorry.
is it?
Well, James Adelot, we haven't told you yet, but you might have to fill that role. So
that was part of the monkeys, the survey monkey who should do that, and we voted for you. So
yeah, who's going to be the semi-nude TikTok dancer? So James A gets the trophy there.
I'm looking forward to show 1001 when we can get back to normalcy around here.
See if our vision recovers.
Yeah. See if we still have jobs after show 1000.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I love that people are excited about that. And just, we have such loyal fans. Thank you so much for hanging out with us every Monday and catching up on the shows and sending in your emails, email at weatherbrains.com. Please continue to put your name and your email in there so I can reply to you. And so that way we know who actually wrote the email. That would be awesome. But we are getting them. It's just sometimes we can't reply. So we'll do our best to get them on the show. But we appreciate it so much.
So quickly, AMS, I think that I guess Commissioner Kim is down there. And I think Neil's speaking tomorrow. And if he's not there, he's on his way. Anybody heard anything from AMS in New Orleans? Any news?
Wow.
So, in fact, my pick of the week, it's going to be the AMS 2025 hashtag on X, where you can kind of follow along. But I have been so busy with the snow and all this other stuff, I've not had a chance to look at it. And I want to say I did attend an AMS annual meeting in New Orleans. This was a while back. Goodness, I can't remember when. It's been, I don't know, probably 15 years. But I spoke at the student conference and had a marvelous time. It was a really, really good session. So hopefully when everybody gets back, we'll get a full report on the AMS annual meeting. And if you've never been to one of these things, it can be overwhelming. The choices that you have to make and the content you can consume. There's only so much. One person can only soak up so much. And I go to these things to learn. I mean, every once in a while I might present, but I like to learn. And there's some brilliant people at these things. So when the commissioner and I don't know, maybe Troy's there. I don't know. Maybe Rick's there. But they should all be back in their perch. Next Monday night, we'll get a full report on that. So let's talk about these fires in Los Angeles. Goodness. James Adelot, don't you think the TV stations have done a pretty good job of handling this in their coverage?
Yeah, in fact, I strongly urged my team to watch a lot of the live coverage because it's akin to what we do during continuous tornado warning coverage. They were just phenomenal. And I keep a close eye on Southern California because I've got a lot of family there, probably probably keep a closer eye on their weather than they do. And not only was this fire outlook shot out by SPC in the whatever the longest window they have, like day 7 or something. I watched Dallas Rains at KABC talking about it even before the weekend preceding it. So, yeah, it was very well forecast, very well communicated, and I thought the Oxnard National Weather Service just pushed every button they could Monday night and Tuesday morning about just how strong that offshore flow was going to be. Um, it's when the wind gets so strong you can't fly air support, that's you're going to have trouble. But as far as the TV stations, I thought that first night when they couldn't be in their helicopters was some of the most riveting TV I'd seen, just popping live shot, live shot, live shot, and some of those with just embers flying around the reporters. It was a master class in media, how to cover a crisis.
Do we know a death toll at this point?
24 is the latest I've heard.
That's the latest number I've heard too.
And of course, the next question is, did people hear the warnings and did they do anything? How was the response? Again, I've been so busy with this snow and everything else here. I see the coverage on these monitors and it looks absolutely horrific. But do we know much about the warning and the response and, how that all went?
I think it seems like the evacuation orders were issued in plenty of time. I know there was a problem in Palisades with so many people coming down, I think Sunset toward Pacific Coast Highway, where they just got into a giant traffic jam, and the I think it was LA County Fire brought in one of those heavy lift bulldozers and just bulldozed their way through all of these vacant cars. And when it was happening, one of the stations had that shot, and I'm looking at it going, they just bulldozed a Bentley and a Mercedes and a Tesla to make room for fire apparatus to go up that road to fight the fire. But I think the evacuation orders were issued in plenty of time. Of course, there's a lot of people that just don't comply for any number of reasons, all of them legit.
Well, again, that's a problem in the tornado business too. And
Yeah.
The whole thing just looks so terrible. It was just horrible images that you saw out there that went on for those days. And I certainly hope that, like Rick Smith and with tornadoes, that's those that worked it on the weather side, have the ability to get some mental health help from professional clinicians after something like that. I couldn't imagine working that. If you worked at one of these TV stations or at the Weather Service out there, I mean, goodness gracious, they probably saw things that they didn't need to see, if you know what I mean. So James, if you're keeping up with it, I understand that they've got these PDS warnings up again for what, today and tomorrow?
Yeah, I think the winds will be strongest after midnight tonight. I just had the Meso West page pulled up, and I'm not seeing anything right now that was anywhere near what we saw last Tuesday night. We had some in the mountains in the San Gabriels there above Altadena, the 95 plus mile per hour winds from time to time, and that's who can even think that was going to happen.
And of course, the big question is, what started these fires? Do we know? Arson? What's the story? Does anybody have any idea?
There are the theories that I've heard about Palisades where it could have been a January 1st firework that was not completely extinguished that rekindled. The Eaton fire, that's the one that went Altadena and Pasadena, may have been arcing power lines. There have already been lawsuits filed.
Yeah. So do they cut power on a regular basis prior to events like this? Is that a thing out there?
They did. My understanding is they did west of the Eaton Canyon, but not east of the Eaton Canyon.
Bill Murray, we got to get somebody on the show that worked this thing, whether it's Weather Service or TV or somebody. That's your new homework. So
yeah, I reached out to some folks, James, but I think they're still so busy. Of course, they're still in the middle of it right now. And so, I haven't heard back, but I'm sure we will in coming weeks. I did reach out to the watch duty folks. Apparently, James, they have a really outstanding app and website program, that's, reaching people. I did watch a lot of Channel 7's coverage, I think, that, over the weekend where they were going back and talking to folks. And it did seem like, to your question, most of them were aware, did get out in time, maybe didn't realize, quite how serious it was going to be. So they didn't take as much as they could have, but they got out with their lives. And that's what's important.
Yeah, it's just I've got so many questions, and I know this is not the time for it because they've got, they're obviously busy now, but at some point down the line, it would be really good to get some folks that work this thing so we can kind of debrief them and learn again,
Yep.
because I think those of us in the tornado business can learn from those in the fire business because we're all working severe weather events that are life threatening. And I just, again, I like to learn from people that have worked some events like that. But goodness
Yeah.
gracious, that's
Shooting
just,
shooting for February 10th. So we'll see how that works out. Hopefully the recovery process will come along nicely in all these affected areas.
I watched
yeah.
a
All right.
Fox 11 live shot, and it was Tuesday night, and an ember landed behind the evacuated house in an evacuated house right behind the reporter, and he saw it. It lights up the grass right next to the house, starts burning up to the house, and while he's on his live shot, he just walks over there, turns on the garden hose, picks up the garden hose, and puts that out. Turns around, finishes his live shot. I'm like, man, that guy is a cool
Amen.
cucumber.
That's
Wow.
awesome.
Wow, geez. Yeah, there'll be a lot of stories to tell, and we will get to that soon. Let's do a quick weather roundup. Jen, what are you doing to us? What's this deal next week?
Yeah, I know. Well, I just I'm upset about
Well,
this Penn State
what's the
game.
matter with you? Come on, let's
I'm
get real
upset.
here, man. What are you
I'm
doing to
upset.
us?
It's the Penn
Thanks a
State.
lot, Jen.
It's the Penn State game. I'm upset, and I'm just going to take it out on everybody. So here, cold air for you, cold air for you. No, it's just wave after wave of cold. I actually have a little rain in my forecast for the weekend. We get just slightly above freezing for the weekend. Finally, we've not been above freezing for a couple weeks, I think now. And then we get very, very cold again. We're very cold tomorrow with highs only in the teens and some wind chill
Ooh.
values tonight and tomorrow, about 0 to 10 below, I think, here. Some of the coldest air we've seen so far. So, yeah, it's great. I'm not going anywhere. But not a lot of snow this week. We have a quick shot tomorrow here, but then we're pretty dry until the weekend.
So, James A., how low does it go in Tulsa next week?
We're keeping the lows above 10, which has disappointed many of the social media virologists who picked up on the European deterministic and went, it's going to be 6 below. Wow, look at the ensembles, and the deterministic wasn't even in the middle 50%. So come on. So, yeah, single
Yeah,
digits will be in the 20s for highs Sunday and Monday both.
That NBM product is pretty darn good. The National Blend of Models. Was that Jeff Craven that came up with that?
He
I
did a
think
lot of work
Craven and
on it.
some. It's really been good this winter when it comes to snow amounts and high low, just the basics nuts and bolts of a weather forecast. And we ought to get some of those guys on the show and talk a little bit about how that whole thing is done, the how the models are weighted and how the final product is derived. But having said that, the NBM for Birmingham has got us in the teens here where we are next week with highs around freezing, which is cold enough. Of course, the issue, it's the snow forecast guys. Boy, they're all over this like flies on poop. You got some guys saying it's going to be a blizzard of 93. And of course, that particular post had over, I think, 85,000 shares, and it's totally gone viral. And what happens to me, I'll sit here and I'll look over on the Facebook private messages, and there's about 100, and they all say these words, "Is it true?" And they'll have a link to this guy's post. And so I have to take time I don't have responding to all of that. But that horse is out of the barn. It's never going to come back. But We might have some snow. I'm not saying we won't, but I'm saying nobody knows at this point. But next week looks very cold and very active here. And people get mad whenever we say that we can't do that. You know, what do you mean you can't do that? Well, Uncle Joe over here on his Facebook page, he's got 10 inches of snow here. What's the matter with you? I thought you're a weather guy. It's just,
Well,
it's a total circus.
and what's maddening about it is, well, somebody asked, is it going to happen? Well, there's not a 0% chance. You'd be crazy to say no, because that'll be the time you get the crazy anomalous event. So, I mean, there just aren't that many absolutes in forecasting.
But I'm just still stunned at one of these TikTok guys. And this was, I don't know, a week or two before Christmas. And this guy was forecasting a whopper of a snowstorm here right around the 1st of January. And of course, it didn't, not a snowflake, but that one video had, I want to say, 8.9 million views. And I know people that make a living as a TikTok influencer, and they understand the monetization process and the creator content fund and what that particular video is worth. And they believe that would be in the vicinity of $8,000, $8,000 for one 3-minute video. $8,000. So that's your motivation. This guy's not going to stop doing that. You're making $8,000 forecasting snowstorms 2 or 3 weeks in advance that never happen. It's a racket. Keep it going, man. Like I say, that's why it's not going to stop. But these are strange times we live in here for sure. People don't understand how to find credible sources for anything, not just weather, but news. And so it's a struggle. But having said all that, let's morph into picks of the week. This is where we go around the horn. Everybody's going to share something that is weather related. This can be a website, hardware, software, anything remotely related to weather. So my pick of the week, it is the AMS 2025 hashtag on X.com. For those of us, those working stiffs like me that cannot get away, it's a way to kind of experience AMS 2025, the AMS annual meeting. And it's pretty interesting. Obviously, it's not as good as being there. It's not as good as sitting in the sessions. But having said that, there's some good little chunks of knowledge that you can gather. So if you're on X, just search out hashtag AMS 2025, and that'll be my pick of the week. All right, Jen, give us something really good.
So mine is from the snowflakebentley.com. It's the Duncan Blanchard WeatherWise article here on the Snowflake Man. And I want to read this one part at the end. This was after Mr. Bentley passed away. The following day, the obituary columns of many a newspaper across the country reported his death, but perhaps the most poignant and understanding comments came from his own hometown paper. Longfellow said that genius is infinite painstaking. John Ruskin declared that genius is only a superior power of seeing. Wilson Bentley was a living example of this type of genius. He saw something in the snowflakes which other men failed to see, not because they could not see, but because they had not the patience and the understanding to look. Truly, greatness blooms in quiet corners and flourishes under strange circumstances, for Wilson Bentley was a greater man than many a millionaire who lives in luxury, of which the Snowflake Man never dreamed. I just thought that was neat. So he did get the recognition finally from his hometown. That's just a neat obituary there.
Indeed, that's outstanding. And again, all the picks will be up on weatherbrains.com. James Adelot, what's your pick of the week?
Well, I've got a couple of them. The first is KABC on their webpage has a long basically montage flyover with their Sky Street technology. I can't remember what they call it. That somehow overlays the street grid onto their camera shot, which is amazing. And I'd only seen it used before in high-speed chases. But they kind of went over it, zoomed in, so people that had evacuated can take a look at that and see if they can see their house in it. The other two picks of the week, LA County has, I think it's LA County, maybe a city county thing, put together a structure by structure GIS map. So you can go to that, go to your address, and in many cases, they've already put pictures of those lots. So you can see how damaged if it's not damaged, things like that. So it's a really great resource for those who have been displaced that aren't back home yet. And who knows when that'll be.
Yeah, yeah, it's just horrific. I mean, these images are, and I feel so helpless. I mean, you see that, people are just losing everything, and I don't care if they're wealthy. I don't give a red rip if you're poor, whatever. It's just a tragedy. It's just bad. All right, Bill Murray, give us something good.
Yeah, James, there was, watching a lot of the coverage, it was heartbreaking to see that, that Super Scooper plane that was grounded because of a drone strike. They've got, lots of drones that are in the air unauthorized, and, it's totally forbidden, as James A can probably comment on, but they're searching for whoever was flying that drone because they damaged that beautiful plane, that is just a life-saving, piece of equipment, and kept it on the ground, till at least today. It may still be grounded tonight. I don't know, but it's amazing to watch those planes in action where they swoop down in the ocean and scoop up all that water and carry it with them. But James, my pick of the week are the watch duty folks, these volunteers that put together this outstanding app that helps people keep up with evacuation zones. I followed it in the past few days, and it really is amazing what they're doing. So we're going to have them on the 10th. We've had a little flurry of guest bookings here. I was talking with Roger Edwards, our a friend at the SPC who retired earlier this year. He's going to join us on the 24th, and it's going to be titled Roger Edwards Unrestrained. So James, that's going to be a great show.
Unhinged, yes.
Yeah,
Unhinged.
that one's
I
going to
like
be
it.
good. And so he accidentally chatted with me that he was talking to Tony Laubach, and I had just seen him on the AccuWeather channel at one of our hotels, and I thought we need to have Tony on the show. So I seized the opportunity after Roger apologized to me for miss texting, and I was like, no, get him on the show. So he is going to join us on the 20th. We're really excited about that. We're going to continue the chasing theme on the 27th with Jen Walton and Heath Lawler. They're going to talk about getting ready for chasing season this year. Jen's got the 3rd of February with Angela Mason, who's written a book about the tri-state tornado. That's when we'll commemorate that historic tornado. And then Janice Huff just let me know, looks like, given that, our lawyers and her agent, work everything out, she'll be with us on February 17th, James, and we've needed to have her on for a long time. So I'm looking forward to sitting down and having a conversation with Janice Huff from New York City.
I like James' comment in the chat here. Our new guest booking officer is Roger Edwards. For we'll make him the deputy guest booking officer.
That's right, and we'll deputize anybody who wants to help. So I appreciate all the great suggestions. Some of those went unnamed in there because they were ideas that were given by some of our fantastic listeners. But I'll make sure you're recognized on the nights we do the shows. And enjoyed last week's show very, very much. And Joel Chanung, I think I said that right. Jen, did I say that right?
I think you did. Yep.
He wrote a really nice note, and I appreciated that. He didn't crucify me for butchering his name, but that show last week was just really moving. And given all the disasters going on in the weather world, I'm afraid we're going to have a lot more of those kind of shows, unfortunately, in the future.
Yeah, that was a very good show last week, and one that if you missed it, you need to go back and listen to that. But we're going to wrap it up here. So again, this is 991. 991. Wow. We're getting so close to 1,000. If you're new here, we're typically on the air every Monday night at 7 o'clock Central, 8 o'clock Eastern, and you can watch us live on the WeatherBrains YouTube channel, youtube.com/WeatherBrains. Of course, all the videos are always there. But we know that most of you listen to the produced audio podcast of the show. However you watch, listen, thank you for your time. We know that there's a gazillion podcasts and media competing for your time. We're honored that you choose to watch or listen. If you want to get in touch with us, the email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com, and be sure and put your name and information so we'll get that straight. But on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening and watching. Have a great week and God bless.
Fun show. Thank y'all. That was
great.
Thank
Thank y'all.
y'all.
what we needed.
Y'all.
Yep. Have a
See
good
y'all
one.
next
Bye.
week.
Y'all stay
Bye,
warm.
everybody.
Yeah.